Welcome to the 50 BMG Big Bore and Overbore Qualifier class at Strategic Edge Gun Range. At the end of this class, you'll be required to take a quiz, and once submitted to our office, we will mail you a 50 BMG ID card to go along with your normal membership ID card that has to be present anytime you're shooting either a 50 BMG or an overbore or a big bore. My name is Tony Schenkel, and I'll be your instructor today. This next slide, you'll see a representation of various cartridges that you might find being shot at a gun range. Everything from on the right, from a .22 long rifle up to a 50 BMG on the left. As always, rule number one on Strategic Edge Gun Range is use common sense. We have a zero tolerance policy for the 50 BMG. There will be no warnings. This is important for you to remember. With other cartridges that you shoot, smaller rifles, centerfire rifles, we have a warning system or a reminder system where if you're making a mistake that's non-life threatening, a member will call your attention to that mistake and you get a chance to correct it. With the 50 BMG and our zero tolerance policy for the 50 BMG, that's not allowed. If you make a mistake in any way or breaking any of the rules and you have a 50, you're held to a higher standard basically. And if you are breaking any of those rules, it will result in you losing your qualification to shoot the 50 BMG at our range, or you might possibly lose your membership at the range. The 50 BMG, 416 Barrett, 408 SHOTAC, 375 SHOTAC, and similar cartridges can only engage targets at distances of 100, 500, 600, 750, 1,000, and 1,250 yards, and only on the 4-foot or 6-foot square armored targets. For the big bores, you're not allowed to let the bullet impact the dirt in the berm. You certainly can't shoot off the berm, but you're also not allowed to impact the berm or other smaller steel targets. So for the big bores, at any distance you shoot, the bullet has to be stopped by either a 4-foot or square or a 6-foot square steel target. Big bores that exceed 3,200 feet per second cannot be shot at the range. Overbores and magnums that exceed 3,200 feet per second at the muzzle should not engage armored steel at 100 yards. So since the big bore bullets have to be stopped by the steel plate, by the big steel plate, if they're more than 3,200 feet per second, then they cannot be shot on a steel plate or they will damage that plate, and therefore they can't be used at the range. But for the overbores and the magnums, you can actually still shoot them on steel at different distances, but if they're over 3,200 feet per second, you cannot shoot them at the 100-yard steel plate. The reason being is that AR-500 steel is only designed to take an impact of up to 3,000 feet per second. So once again, if you're shooting an overbore, it's a really fast cartridge. By the time you get out to 200 or 300 yards, it will have probably reduced the speed down to around the 3,000-yard mark, and it would be safe to shoot. But up close at 100 yards, you're going to have to shoot paper targets only. The 100-yard steel target is for sight-in and zero purposes only. As we've mentioned in our safety orientation before and our long-range qualifier, those targets are there for rough sight-in for someone who has knocked their zero off, put on a new scope. They're not there for a refined zero. You can't even shoot a piece of steel and tell where a firearm is hitting accurately based on the size of the splatter mark. So you need to be able to sight your gun in on a paper target. Those targets should not be abused. The 100-yard big sight-in plates are just for use, rough sight-in use only. You should not sit there and shoot round after round after round on them. You're not going to learn anything. You don't get a lot of positive feedback out of it because you can't tell the exact bullet location. So sight in on a paper target if you can, if it's within the rules, and then move on to other distances. Your 100-yard zero must be checked before engaging any other targets for each trip to the range. You always have to check your 100-yard zero. If you're sighting in for the first time, your rifle must be bore sighted to ensure that you will hit within the 4-foot square at the 100-yard steel target on your first shot. So if you bring your 50 BMG or any of the big bores to the range, you have to guarantee that that first shot is going to be on that steel. Again, they're not allowed to hit the dirt. They cause too much damage to the earth berms. You're responsible for knowing, not guessing, your muzzle velocity, your ballistic coefficient, and corrections needed, your dope, for the temperature and conditions in which you'll be shooting. That sums up that's a lot of information in one sentence and sums up everything that a rifleman should learn about his rifle and his cartridge that he's shooting. And we are not going to tolerate that out of the magnums and the big bores and the overbores, people not knowing this information. So we're not going to let you read your velocity off the back of a box. You're going to have to be able to chronograph it. You're going to have a weather instrument to gather the atmospheric data that you need. You need to be able to run a ballistic computer also. Folks, these cartridges have much more energy, much more speed. They're much more lethal, much more dangerous to shoot. There's a higher level of responsibility when you use any of these types of firearms, and you need to know what you're doing before you start sending shots downrange. This next slide will show you a picture of a 4-foot by 4-foot target. You'll see that there's also a 12-inch by 12-inch center plate that stands off. It's also steel. That gives you a better aim point when you're doing a rough sight in for your rifle. They're 4-foot and 4-foot everywhere on the range except for the 1,000 and 1,250 yard berms. And at those two locations, those targets are 6-foot by 6-foot with a 12-inch square in the center. Rounds can only be fired at the 4-foot or 6-foot square AR-500 steel target and target backers. This means there are only 7 total targets that can be used, 2 on the short range and 5 on the long range. That's another thing. It's also with these big guns, the 50s, it's really, once you get your zero completed 100 yards, we really don't want you shooting anything at short range, anything really under 500 yards. If you get your zero identified, let's say you've got a 50 BMG and you've zeroed it by pulling a paper target in front of the 100-yard steel target, you're using an approved bullet, you've stopped the round. We don't want you to go ahead and be shooting the 200s and 300s and all those. It's too close for these big rounds. You need to move out to 500 or greater before you shoot again. Target stands with paper targets may be used if they are placed directly in front of the 4-foot by 4-foot or 4-foot by 6-foot square steel to ensure that we stop the projectile. So again, you can move a paper target in front of the steel if you're shooting a 50 BMG. You move your paper target out in front of that steel to ensure that we stop that projectile. A little warning for you, you're going to have to do a little bit more work because the splatter off that steel will come through the backer and through your target and pretty much shred it. And so you need to bring a piece of carpet or a piece of some kind of board from home and some clamps, and you need to be prepared to drape something over the back of that paper target stand so that the splatter doesn't come back off the steel through your sight-in target. If you miss the 4-foot or 6-foot square steel plate for any reason, you are finished for the day with that weapon system. Do not fire again. And we're very serious about that rule. You have a higher responsibility with these what we call the big guns, and you need to know what you're doing. You need to be able to not only assure yourself but everyone else at the range that you're not missing these targets. There's no room for error. If you have any type of miss whatsoever, you have to pack up and go home. You're done. And if you are having a problem with that, it's probably a sign you need additional training on that weapon system. Shooting must be done from a bench that is located directly in front of the target. Relocate to a different shooting bench to shoot each target. So we want you can tell from the long-range qualifier and the safety orientation that you've already been through that we do require you to get somewhat in line with the berms that you're engaging. But there's a little leadway there. You can have a tiny bit of angle with the smaller guns, and because of the shape of the berms and the way the steel plates are angled, you can get a little bit of angle there and still not send bullets ricocheting off of the steel targets. We don't allow that though with the 50 BMG and these larger guns. There's so much energy that it's much harder to control angles and where the ricochet goes. So we require that you get directly in line with any target that you're engaging, even if that requires that you relocate from one time to another. If you're shooting at a 100-yard berm and you can still see the 500, but there's a little angle there, you would get up and actually relocate to a different bench to get you more in line with that 500-yard berm before you fired your next shot. What can go wrong? We're about to watch a video where a few gentlemen have gone out and to what looks to me to be an unapproved range, and they've set up a mild steel target, not an armored target, that has probably formed somewhat of a cup. It's gotten deformed. And this video floats around the internet a lot, and people say it's at 1,000 yards and the bullet comes back. It's not at 1,000 yards. It's more like 100 yards away. And again, he's got an unapproved piece of steel he's shooting, and he's probably shooting a common ball round like the M2 ball or the M33 ball, which most people don't realize has a mild steel core inside. So when you shoot a piece of steel into a cupped piece of steel, it's a lot like throwing a golf ball into a concrete bucket. It comes right back out at you. And you're going to see that happen in this video. As a matter of fact, when it comes back, you're going to hear that it's bleeding by the sound of it, that it's probably near supersonic steel. And then you're going to witness it bounce about 12 foot out in front of the shooter. You'll see a little piece of dust come up where it bounces off the ground, and then it's going to impact his ear muffs. So let's watch the video.
Last one of them we're doing. Am I bleeding?
No.
Whoa.
It got you right in the side of your head.
Where'd it hit? Right in the side of my head.
We're not doing that anymore.
Okay, you'll notice they keep saying it hit him in the side of the head. That's completely not true. A 700 grain projectile at near the speed of sound coming back would have looked like a watermelon exploding if it had hit him in the head. So that's not what happened. It came back, it bounced. It was probably just the core of the bullet and not the entire bullet. Probably shed its jacket. It's probably just the core. It came back, it bounced off the ground. It hit his earmuffs, and just the tremendous amount of energy that probably transferred through his earmuffs to his skull made him think that he was hitting the head again. But these things can come back, and you need to be aware of that. 50 BMG rounds have such a tremendous amount of energy that if you're not doing this correctly, and you don't have approved targets and make sure that you're going about all the correct procedures and steps, then it can certainly send a bullet back, which could be devastating. Be courteous. You must shoot on off days and times so there's minimum impact to others. Don't bring your 50 BMG out here on a Saturday or Sunday when the range has a lot of people, a lot of customers, and think you're going to belly up in between some guys and start shooting. You need to pick off days. I know you're proud of your firearm, but you're going to have to get over that. You're going to have to pick off days and times so that there's not many people at the range and that you can assure that you have some empty benches on each side of you and you're not going to disturb other people. Make sure you properly warn everyone on the line to wear eye protection and double ear protection. So when shooting, that's a range rule to, of course, have foam plugs under your muffs. We suggest that you do that, and it's a range rule that you always have appropriate eye and ear protection at all times. But the one time that you should go ahead and remind people of that is before you shoot a 50 BMG. They off-gas so much they can pick up particles of gravel and dust and throw them back toward other shooters. They're very loud. If you go ahead and be a good shooter and be a responsible shooter and remind everyone on the line before you shoot that you're about to fire a 50 BMG, so it gives them time to adequately protect themselves. Try to always have an empty bench in between you and other shooters, and that's a requirement. You need to get that empty bench in between you and the next shooter. Especially with the 50 BMGs. The way they off-gas, it's usually pointed right at the bench on each side of you. The guy next to you is not going to be your friend if you knock his cup of coffee off his bench in his lap. So, or even worse, it picks up dust and debris and throws it back at high speed at those other shooters. So always make sure you have an empty bench. Use a shooting screen on each side of you if possible. That shooting screen helps reduce some of that off-gassing and some of that debris that comes out. So you want to make sure you get a shooting screen on each side of you before you fire. Do not let others shoot unless they have passed this qualifier class. So the 50 BMG, because of its role in movies and the nostalgia around it, that people really like to gather and watch them shoot or listen to them shoot, and you're going to get a lot of people that want to shoot your firearm. And most shooters are nice people, and they let each other shoot their guns, but in this case you can't do that. But if they haven't been through this class, then the answer is a strict no. They cannot get on your rifle and shoot it. They have to pass this qualifier class, have to have that 50 BMG ID tag on there with their membership card in order to shoot a 50. Only target ammo. If you're unsure, then don't fire. All ammo must be checked with a magnet. If a magnet sticks to your bullet, it cannot be used at our range. This is a really easy way to do it. Later, we're going to go through a lot of different cartridges that cannot be used at the range with the 50 BMG, but this also goes over toward any big bore or any magnum or overbore. So a lot of hunting rounds have some steel inside of them and you don't realize it. So for all of these bullets, and that's a general rule that we teach in the long range qualifier and in the safety orientation, you have to check your bullets with a magnet. And if a magnet will stick to your bullet, you cannot fire it on our steel at our range. So for the 50, if a magnet sticks to it, you really shouldn't even have that ammo at the range. You can't fire into a berm, and if we can't fire it on steel, then it means it shouldn't even be here. You can't fire it at all. It's going to limit you down to just a few soft solids. I think Barnes has a 660 solid, and the most popular bullet that's a target bullet for the 50 BMG is the 750 AMAX. No military surplus ammo can be used. No steel or tungsten core ammo is allowed. Absolutely none of the following rounds can be fired: an M1 HP, an M1 Incendiary, M1 Tracer, M2 Ball, the M2 AP, the M8 API, the M10, the M17, M20, M23, the M33, the M903 slap round, or the M962 slap T, or the Mark 211 Rofus, or any anti-material rounds can be used or fired at our range. Penetration. So as you can tell from this video already, we're going to be hard on you about the rules when it comes to a 50 BMG, and there's a whole different set of rules and you have a different level of responsibility. And the reason is because if a normal centerfire round, gets out 2,000 or 3,000 yards, the amount of energy it's carrying is not much in comparison to the 50 BMG. The 50 BMG, when I've looked it up in a ballistic computer, has more energy at 1 mile, than the 338 Lapua Magnum does at the muzzle. So you think about that, standing in front of if you shot something right off the end of your muzzle with a 338 Lapua Mag, and it doesn't have as much energy as a 50 BMG is able to maintain at 1 mile. So these things can go a long, long ways and still go through buildings and cars and people's homes, and they can cause a tremendous amount of damage. And if you look at the penetration just on this chart, you'll notice that we're just taking an M2 ball round, just a common ball round, but we all know with the 50, that means that it does have a mild steel core, but shooting at a 45-inch barrel, and you'll see that whether you're shooting at 200 meters, 600 meters, or 1,500 meters, that concrete doesn't really stop it that well. It kind of has the same amount of penetration. Clay is the same way. It 28 inches at 200 meters, but it still does 26 at 600 and 21 at 1,500 meters. So it's not stopping it. The real enemy to a 50 BMG is sand. You can notice it does 14 inches of sand at 200 meters, 12 inches at 600, but then it goes way down to 6 inches at 1,500 meters. So a lot of times in forward operating bases and in combat zones, you'll see the use of HESCO barriers, and you'll see them scooping up sand and putting them inside those HESCO barriers. And that's the purpose, because the sand caves back. Instead of creating a cavitation hole and letting the bullet penetrate, the sand falls in on itself and it slows the bullet down much more quickly than other types of media like clay or concrete. A great example of how much penetration a 50 BMG has, or how much it can do, is this 6 mild steel plates that have been bolted together and shot with a, I believe it was a ball round, and it still penetrated all 6 of these plates. This wasn't even what the military considers an armor-piercing round, and you can see it still went through all 6 of them, including that bottom one, which is kind of buried in the carpet, but it did penetrate. If you shot that with a normal target bullet out of a, let's say, a .338 Lapua Magnum, it is doubtful. Those are probably 3/8-inch steel plates, mild steel plates. It's doubtful it would, even if it got through the first one, it wouldn't go through the second one at all. And I doubt it even go through the first one. It'd probably just destroy the bullet on impact. So you can see how well the 50 BMG can penetrate, and hopefully that will wake you up and make you a little more concerned about stopping that bullet and the final resting place of that bullet, and using the approved bullet type. Again, we can stop a target bullet, but these AP rounds, or these bullets that have steel in them, will not be stopped by our armored steel on the range. Back to different kinds of ammunition types. I'm not going to cover these in great detail. They are included. You can read about them. We have them posted 2 different locations in the clubhouse. You can see each one of these military bullet types and read a description, detailed description, but we will sort of name them. You can see they're marked in different colors, and so they can be identified. The only ones that don't have a color is there's a test round that usually has a silver case. You won't see that as a civilian. It's usually just used at an armory for them to test a new rifle or a rifle system to see if they're overpressure rounds, so you won't see people shooting them. The one that gets people in trouble at a gun range is probably going to be number 5, and it's either going to be an M2 or an M33 ball round. They look like standard target rounds. A lot of people think when they can buy them cheaper, and so it makes them want to believe this, because when you go look at 750 AMAXs and they're $8, $9 a piece, and you go into a gun store and you see some ball ammo at $3, then it's attractive to a 50 BMG owner. But I'm sorry, you can't shoot them here, because they have a mild steel core and they will damage the steel. All the rest of them, a good general rule is, besides a magnet not sticking to it, which you have to try before you shoot any of these rounds, any rounds out of this type of weapons, the 50 or the big bores or the overbores or magnums, you need to check the bullet with a magnet. But with a 50 BMG, you have a second thing, which is most of them have a colored tip because they're designed to do something different, and that's how the military can easily identify them. And anything that's got any kind of color at all cannot be shot at the range. So we're going to go review them in general. It's just, we're not going to go through the details, but number 1 was an MO2, an armor-piercing explosive incendiary. The second one there, number 2, was an M1 ball high-pressure test round, which we mentioned. The third one was an M1 incendiary round. Number 4 was an M1 tracer. Number 5 was an M2 ball round, which we also talked about, M2 ball and M33 ball. They're going to not have a color on them, and those are the ones that will get you in trouble if you shoot them at the range, because they can be commonly mistaken for a regular target bullet. So be sure to check them with a magnet before you fire. The number 6 was an M2 armor piercing round. You can see armor penetration on that AP round. It'll do about 3/4 of an inch of armored steel at 500 meters. So it will, and at 1,200 meters, it'll punch through 0.39 inches, which we're going to say is about 3/8 of an inch. Our steel backer at 1,250 yards is about the same. It's about a 0.37 inch. So it's actually designed, this AP round is actually designed to penetrate our armored steel at 1,250 yards. And it will do so. And you are responsible for the damage you cause. And so if you don't follow these rules, then you end up buying a plate. These plates are very, very expensive. The M8 armor piercing incendiary round was number 7. Number 8 is an M10 tracer. Number 9 is an M17 tracer. And number 10 was the armor piercing incendiary tracer, and again you can see it actually penetrates a little better than just the standard AP round. 0.83 inches of armor at 500 meters, and 0.43 inches of armor at 1,200 meters. Number 11 was an M23 incendiary. Number 12 is a slap round, the M903. It's a sabot round. It's a tungsten, small 30, I think it's a 30 caliber tungsten steel rod that's sharpened, and is shot in a sabot, which separates from the bullet when it exits, and it's doing around 4,000 feet per second. These are really, really nasty rounds. They're designed to penetrate 2 to 3 times the amount of high hard armor that a normal round can penetrate. And high hard armor is even different than the armor you find on a gun range. It's more like the armor you find on a tank. And those rounds are designed to penetrate 3/4 of an inch of high hard armor at 1,500 meters. The M962 is basically another slap round, but they add a tracer. So it's a slap round with a tracer and the same penetration power. And then number 14 is a round that's, they call it a sniper round. It's really popular, but again, it's going to the M1022 actually still has a mild steel core. So you can't shoot those at the range either, and a magnet will stick to them. The Mark 211 Mod 0 Rofus, if you bought a 50 because you like to watch movies and you've seen the examples of people shooting into a piece of concrete, and it blows the concrete out and kills the guys behind the concrete. Well, that was probably a Mark 211 Rofus. It is basically not only has a penetrator inside, but it also has an explosive that's put into the tip of that round, and it also has an additional incendiary compound that's in it. Very, very dangerous round. Number 16 was the Mark 257. It's an armor-piercing incendiary dim tracer. It's really made sort of a newer round for the 50 BMG, and it's made so that the night vision doesn't have to be adjusted if you're shooting at night, shooting these tracers at night. Overbores and magnums. As always, rule number 1 on strategic edge gun range is use common sense. Big bores, overbores, and magnums that exceed 3,200 feet per second at the muzzle should not engage any armored steel at 100 yards. We've covered this once before, but again, you need to look at a ballistic program and determine where that bullet is doing less than 3,000 feet per second, and that will be the shortest distance you can shoot with that cartridge on this range. Only use target bullets on steel. Hunting bullets, bonded bullets, and solids are not allowed on steel under 300 yards. Bullets must be checked with a magnet before you shoot. A target bullet, by definition, is a thin copper jacket with a soft lead infill. And that is the only thing that you should really be using on the steel targets at the range. Now, some people are going to want to shoot a hunting bullet or a solid at times, but solids can be tricky. Solids can be hardened. Some of the brass and copper solids are hardened, and they can be semi-armor defeating. So you have to be very careful of that. We really don't want you shooting any type of solid under 300 yards on the steel. And really the same thing applies to hunting bullets. A lot of the bonded hunting bullets, and some of them are hardened. And of course you're going to check all these with a magnet before you start, but some of them are hard enough that they become armor damaging or somewhat armor defeating. And we do not want you to shoot them under 300 yards on the steel. Frangible and armor-piercing bullets should not be used. So a frangible, of course, armor-piercing is self-explanatory in that it's going to damage the steel targets. But what people are finding out now, gun ranges are finding out pretty quickly, is that frangible ammo a lot of times is a lot lighter and has a lot more velocity. And that velocity, of course, can burn its way through steel. Is what happens if you get to a certain velocity. You start literally burning a hole through the steel. So even frangible bullets should not be used on our steel at the range. Be respectful of others. If the muzzle blast of your rifle is excessive, consider a blast shield or an empty bench beside you. Remember, you are a safety officer for our range, and you should act the part. You are responsible for the damage that's caused by the misuse of your rifle. Violations of these rules will result in a loss of your certification to shoot these weapons, or the loss of your membership at the range. In conclusion, shooting the 50 BMG derivatives, magnums, and overbore rifles carry with them more responsibility, and you are ultimately liable for where your bullet lands and the damage that is caused. You should always continually educate yourself and strive to keep safety foremost in your mind. There is no second chance once you've pulled that trigger. Shooting these firearms at our range is a luxury and a privilege which may be revoked at any time. On occasion, we may test and deem a bullet type or cartridge to the banned list, and we'll notify you if this happens. Thank you for taking this class.